Let's get to immigration. There's been a number of moves in the last 72 hours, which have really show how much of a different political landscape that we're in. First and foremost was this. Let's put it up there on the screen. The Laken Riley Act has now passed the House of Representatives. The vote was 263 to 156. 46 Democrats joined with every Republican to support that bill, and it will now be the very first bill that President Trump will sign into law. Just in terms of how you guys can see the vibe shift. The Laken Riley Act, as a reminder, is one that allows the federal government to deport individuals, illegal immigrants who are here who have been convicted or have been charged with a crime, even a misdemeanor offense.
It's a little different than that. It requires them to detain undocumented immigrants, even before they're tried, even before they're convicted. So if they're accused of a crime, even something low level like shoplifting or something like that, then they are required to detain them and to expedite their deportation. So that's what the bill does.
Right, it hadn't that's legal standard had not previously existed. You know what's crazy?
Because there's no due process, but anyway.
Right, due process applies to who? U.S. citizens, right, forgot about that. But if we think about how different that this changes, it's the first bipartisan piece of immigration legislation that has passed the U.S. Congress in almost 20 years, just to give people the scale of how much of a change that has now happened. So that's crazy, first and foremost. Passed the House, passed the Senate. The House of Representatives, the 46 Democrats, joining on is a little bit, it makes sense, but it's not like it's a big part of the coalition. The crazy part is it was enough to get a filibuster-proof majority through the Senate. That's actually the big hurdle that happened. So Trump will sign that piece of legislation into law. Let's continue here. Let's go to the next part, just to show people who voted for the bill. So you can actually see all of the states. I mean, it really does go the gamut in terms of both the House Democrats, people like Josh Gottheimer from New Jersey. By the way, Krystal, I don't know if you know this. He's been passing around packets of salt around the House because he's so enthusiastic.
He's gonna get his way. The Republicans supported
Well, he gives them the immigration thing, and then maybe they'll give him an increase in the salt cap for his rich constituents.
I mean, yeah, you got him, you got Richie Torres on there, Cuellar.
High-profile folks.
What's that?
Who are some other high-profile folks here?
Cuellar's there.
That makes sense, though, right? Because he's from south of the border.
Well, and I mean, I was also right-wing, consistently sort of right-wing. So my new congressman, Congressman Vindman.
Oh, no. I didn't know he was your rep.
This one, Saagar, so he's an ally with you in this one. Okay. Terry Sewell, she's a African-American woman, congressman from Alabama. Jared Golden, who also is one who's kind of like, I don't know, his politics are a little hard to describe. Lucy McBath. Laken Riley was from Georgia. So you had a number of Georgia members here, plus both Georgia senators were knocking Ossoff. Both voted for it as well.
Right. Let's continue along that. There has been a glut of polling now after the election around immigration and some of the individual actions. And mass deportation in particular has been one that's been polled, but also all of kind of the sub-ideas of immigration, running from ending birthright citizenship up to just deporting illegal immigrants who came here under the Biden administration. CNN's Harry Enton broke some of that down. Some of it is popular, some of it is very unpopular. Let's take a listen.
Deporting all immigrants who are here illegally, 55% of the New York Times, Marquette 64%, CBS News 57%, ABC News with a slightly different question, 56%. So what you're seeing essentially here is a very clear indication that a majority of Americans, in fact, when they're asked this blunt question, which I believe gets at the underlying feelings, do in fact want to deport all immigrants who are here illegally. There's no arguing with these different numbers because they're all essentially the same across 4 different pollsters. You go back to 2015, I'm going to come to your side of the screen, it was 42%. Hello. Go to 2016, it was 36%. Look at where we are now. This was taken at the end of last year, 56%. This is 20 points higher than it was just before Trump got into office the first time.
There you go. That's as clear as day in terms of mass deportation. But like I said, we got to present all sides of the picture. Birthright citizenship, though, is significantly underwater. Ending birthright citizenship. What I mean, one of those executive orders that Donald Trump signed on the first day of office. Let's take a listen to Harry on that.
I mean, look, I think Donald Trump is, by pushing policies like this, are just trying to eliminate his honeymoon period completely, because this is just not a popular policy. End birthright citizenship for children born to immigrants illegally here. Look at this. Just 35% support. The clear majority, 53% oppose. And I've looked at multiple polls, looked at the question asked multiple different ways. If anything, this undersells the opposition by a little bit. If you don't, in fact, mention for children born to immigrants here legally and just ask about ending birthright citizenship, the opposition shoots all the way up to about 70%. But this 53% is clearly indicative of a country that does not want to end birthright citizenship. Simply put, this is not a popular policy, and if Donald Trump pushes policies like this, his honeymoon period will squeeze and be even shorter than it was back in 2017.
Okay, have opinion.
So you can see there that definitely opinion runs the gamut, and it shows you it's not necessarily as rosy as I might like it to be. Let's put this up there from the New York Times, because they also did a good job of breaking down each one of these individual questions. So for example, which of the following comes closest to your opinion about our nation's political system? It has been broken for decades. It has been broken only for the last few years. It is not broken. I can report that only 9% of U.S. adults say it is not broken. I need to meet these people.
I know.
You know, I really do.
Those folks.
But on immigration, actually, is where things get really interesting. So from the New York Times, do you support or oppose each of the following? Deporting immigrants who are here illegally and have criminal records, 87%, 10% oppose. Deporting immigrants who are here illegally and arrived over the last 4 years, 63%, 33% oppose. Deporting all immigrants who are here illegally, aka mass deportation, 55%, 42% oppose. Then ending birthright citizenship for born to immigrants who are here illegally is 41%. And then finally, the least popular one is ending protection from deportation for immigrants who were children when they entered the U.S. illegally, otherwise known as DACA recipients and or dreamers. So you can see here that what Trump, I believe, has happened, and from my speaking people who are around the administration, is they're trying a flood the zone strategy. So what do you do when you're doing something unpopular? You also need to do something that's really popular. So they are trying to keep it so that the conversation is not around any one issue, but is just a flood of executive orders and a major change to the status quo. That's where mass deportation and some of the actions we're about to talk about really come into play, in addition to things like the Laken Riley Act. But really what I see is a basic collapse of the Democratic argument around immigration. I mean, I'm happy to see it, but it is really interesting because I think it just demonstrates how fake Democratic opposition has been on this issue now for so long. It's like we've talked about, I mean, maybe this is where we can find some common ground. It's like, people don't believe anything.
That's correct.
You went from 2018 weeping outside of these, deportation camps or whatever, and the screeching, and the, the fascism argument, to voting for the Laken Riley Act, a position that you all opposed on the stage. You remember in 2019 on the Democrat, every single candidate on that stage opposed what is now being passed in the Laken Riley Act, which is passed with a supermajority through the Senate and through the House of Representatives to send to Donald Trump's desk here. So what's happening exactly with that? Or we're all supposed to have amnesia? Come on.
They're cowards by and large. Like, obviously there are some Democrats most of the Democrats are opposed to this, blah, blah, blah. But certainly the level of consistent opposition to Trump immigration hawkishness is gone. It's gone. I mean, and this happened even before Trump was elected. You remember they decided we're going to show the Republicans, we're going to get behind this hawkish border security only bill with no pathway to citizenship. We're going to show them that we're the ones who are really tough on the border. I mean, think about how much Kamala Harris positioned herself as I'm the only person here who's prosecuted transnational gangs. I'm the real border hawk, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, the bottom line is that they are mostly cowards who don't really, many of them, have their own ideology or have things that they're willing to fight for, even when it's a little uncomfortable or even when at that particular political moment it's, a little unpopular. And this is a core rot of neoliberal brain, which infects, corners of both parties, but notably not Trump. Trump is willing to bulldozer through whatever he wants to, even if, ending birthright citizenship is dramatically unpopular, he's going to go ahead and do it. Even if pardoning J6ers who beat cops, obviously wildly unpopular, but he'll just bulldoze through and do it. And, you know, on the neoliberal brain says basically like, I don't have any values of my own. I outsource all of my thinking to markets and polls. And the extension, the political ideology extension of that is quote unquote popularism, where it's just, rather than having my own like vision and view of the world, I'm going to take a poll and I'm going to treat that poll as gospel as to what people think and where they are. And I'm just going to cater to that in the focus groups, whatever. It is a completely failed way of doing politics. And this is what I've been trying to shout from the rooftops. And, you know, two people who are very different ideologically who seem to understand this are, number one, Donald Trump, who will just relentlessly push his view and his vision of the world, however it polls and however people may, you know, complain about it. And Bernie Sanders, who has his own very specific and clear-cut vision of the world and isn't buffeted around by, oh, a poll says this today or a poll says that last week or, oh, it's a little uncomfortable, et cetera, et cetera. And guess what? People respect that. And that's how, if you care about actually implementing your principles and ideology, you have to be a leader and make the case to people and push them to your position. And that's what Republicans on mass deportation have successfully done. And specifically Donald Trump has successfully done. Part of that is, yes, the reality of more people coming to the border, although at this particular moment, and this drop happened even before the election, we're at like a 5-year low in terms of number of illegal crossings. But, you know, there was the reality of migrants getting bused to cities, et cetera, et cetera. And it was also Democrats abandoning the principles that 5 seconds ago they claimed they stood by. So of course the public's gonna look and go, oh, well, both parties basically agree that this whole immigration thing is like a real problem. These migrants are a big issue. So where do you think the polling is going to go? So this is the part of politics that liberal Democrats are fundamentally incapable of really wrapping their heads around. You have to be a leader. People's opinions are not set in stone. I mean, even the immigration like polling that we're showing you right now, which put the AP poll up on the screen as well, it's not, you know, it depends on how people are asked the question, and it depends on how you frame it and what particular part of the policy you're asking about. Most people are not like hardcore ideologues the way that, frankly, you and I are, Saagar. Most people are like, you know, it depends on kind of the vibes and the mood and what they heard and how the question's asked, et cetera. You can move people and change public opinion. So in this poll, about 4 in 10 American adults support deporting all immigrants living in the U.S. Illegally, and a similar share are opposed. So it's pretty much like 50-50 here, or 40-40, and I guess the other 20% like, I don't know. But they tested another policy that it was just announced that they're lifting the restrictions on deportations from quote-unquote sensitive places. That's places like churches and school. Wildly unpopular to do that. Only 20% support arresting immigrants at church. 18% support pulling kids out of school to deport them. Relatively few Americans, only 3 in 10 in this particular poll, somewhat or strongly favor changing the Constitution so kids born in the U.S. are not automatically granted citizenship. That's the birthright citizenship thing that we were talking about. So there is, even within the Trump policy right now, if Democrats decided to have a principle, there are plenty of things to go after. But to your point, Saagar, the flood the zone strategy is not just to try to counterbalance the things that are unpopular with the things that are popular. It's also to try to keep the opposition from settling on one consistent attack and to keep them sort of like scattered. And, you know, the crazy thing to me is like, you know, looking at a political party is a lot of these executive orders that he signed, it's not like they were a surprise. Many of them were in Project 2025. Many of them are things that he's been advertised and have been leaked to the press for weeks and weeks now. And there is really no consistent, like sort of unified Democratic plan to attack any of these things right now, let alone immigration. So anyway, that was a long screed about like sort of my political, you know, meta political views and how these things work. But the Republicans wanted to make the country more nativist and more hawkish on immigration. They did that, and the Democratic opposition completely collapsed. And not only did they lose the battle on the issue, but they also showed themselves to be fundamentally unprincipled.
Yes, I agree with half of that in terms of they are unprincipled. I as I always say, I think reality played a role. The people actually got to
reality
see.
played a role.
Fair enough, but I'm saying Biden was a huge part of it. He changed the immigration status quo more than any president in modern American history in terms of the number of illegals who entered under his watch. So, okay, yeah, of course that's going to radically change the way it. I mean, you know, it's funny, if you look at support for mass deportation, it was underwater in 2016 as Harry played, even with Republicans. People were not bought in.
Yeah.
But when you have the border, basically have 10 million people who come here illegally in a 4-year period, well, yeah, that's going to completely change.
Well,
Trump also played a big role in that. But
Right.
the status quo change on top of the argument, it basically aligned perfectly then with also the popular vote. And then the collapse of Democratic argumentation means that they are, I mean, people who are immigration restrictionists like myself have never been in a more powerful position. This went from a fringe position of Stephen Miller and Jeff Sessions in 2015, 10 years ago, one member of the United States Senate and a guy named Stephen Miller, to the policy of the United States government.
And here's what I want people to understand. That position was wildly unpopular at the time. Did that make them go, oh, we can't? We gotta do a Gang of 8 immigration. We gotta move to the left on this. We gotta accept him.
Killing Gang of 8 was a part of that.
No, it did not. Did not cause the Stephen Millers and the Steve Bannons and the Donald Trumps and the Jeff Sessions of the world to suddenly change their position and bend to the current political moment. Instead, they made it a project of over years pushing a consistent vision and message. And guess what? You're right, Saagar. They won. And you can see Democrat pathetic, like just complete capitulation to this worldview. Now, what I would say is the caution is that after Trump was elected and began implementing, child separation policy, and we had those, horrific, like I would say, cruel images coming out from the detention center, kids being intentionally taken away from their parents, et cetera, and orphaned in certain instances. And the public had a revulsion to that. The support for those immigration policies dropped even further, so that there was the lowest level we've had in the past number of decades for hawkish immigration policy that we've seen. And that's what Democrats responded to in that 2020 primary, and why they were all in a very different place was because the polling was in a very different place at that point. So there is a risk here because they are planning on, they got rid of the restrictions on the pulling people out of church or pulling kids out of school. Obviously, child separation is going to be back. They actively, well, I don't think you would disagree with this, they actively want some of those images of, that are aggressive and unsettling and, cruel and all of those things, because part of the goal is they don't have the resources to deport everyone who's in the country. So what part of their ideology is you want to scare people into, number one, not coming, and number two, quote unquote, self-deporting.
Well, that's already working, actually. Already we see images from the border where people are like, without CBP1, it's never going to happen. I should just go back. I actually just read a BBC article about
those are people who are trying to come legal, who are trying to follow a legal process. So yeah, if there's no legal process, they're like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great.
And then
it's like, well, if you can go back, you weren't really fearing for your life, were you? It's not so untenable. Let's put this up there
what other
on the screen. Yeah, fine. Go make your own country great again. We wish you the best. Let's put the AP up on the screen. The Pentagon is sending up 1,500 active duty troops to help secure the U.S.-Mexico border. That will be in addition to the 2,300 troops that President Biden sent actually to the border. It's actually less than Biden, ironically. These troops apparently will be helping with some ISR and a few other things. There are a lot of legal restrictions that apply to active duty U.S. military troops operating in the United States. They can't actually participate in law enforcement.
Well,
all they can really do is support it.
That's a little unclear because, in terms of, the number is roughly equivalent to what Biden sent in terms of active duty troops. Biden used them purely in those support roles that, are more sort of clear cut in terms of you don't want to run afoul of posse comitatus, which is a restriction on you can't have the military doing domestic law enforcement effectively. But Trump is declaring a national border emergency. And the Wall Street Journal is reporting that part of the reason for doing that is to try to get around those laws that prohibit troops from engaging in law enforcement functions. So even though it's the same roughly number of people, the goal and the plan in terms of how they're used is quite different. Now, that will certainly face legal obstacles, and it's yet to be seen whether Trump actually, deploys them in that way, where they would be the ones detaining migrants and, holding them and rounding them up and all those sorts of things, which normally has been completely out of bounds. But the declaration of a national emergency, which says, oh, this is a national security issue, ergo I can use my military, part of the goal is to directly enlist the military in those sorts of, typically law enforcement functions.
A lot of this is also just because the Border Patrol there's a lot of funding problems. Like, that's all controlled by Congress, the exact number of the people that they're allowed to hire. So if you do even want to change the status quo, they don't even have the employees at ICE, at Border Patrol, at DHS. So it would require, not just it would require basically a bipartisan act of Congress to change that status quo. Let's go to the next one. Here is a change in policy. We had previewed some of this, where they say U.S. border agents have been instructed to summarily deport migrants without asylum hearings. What they have done is they have resurrected that Title 42 law of public health concern,
right,
and 212F that allows the presidents to suspend the entry of foreigners whose entry is deemed to be detrimental because of public health concerns. This was one that the Biden administration used for the first, 2 years, I think? The first 2 years of the Biden administration with COVID as a justification.
Trump had put it in place, and they maintained it.
They maintained the policy going forward. It's a public, the document cite the public health related 212F. It applies to, quote, aliens that have traveled through a country with a communicable disease, and given that there are communicable diseases in Guatemala, Mexico, and Central America, it's pretty easy to justify. It's basically just a legal workaround to enforce the Remain in Mexico policy as the only viable path for asylum status in the United States. And what it means is that not only will there be deportations to Mexico, but Remain in Mexico requires these people to remain in Mexico, as it means, as they adjudicate their asylum claim. Only after being legally approved are they allowed to enter the United States. It's part of the reason why, you were saying that there has been a drop-off, but the drop-off from the drop-off is even crazier. So the day before Donald Trump took the office, 4,000 people entered the United States under this CBP-1 asylum app. It's dropped to 500. So we're talking about, like, what is that, an 8-fold decrease in the span of 2 days for what the policy looks like in practice. This, I want to be clear, will all face insane legal scrutiny. So for anyone who thinks that this is policy, law of the land, that's not how it works. Title 42 and all that will make its way to SCOTUS, I'm sure, very soon. That's what the immigration groups were doing to Biden. The Posse Comitatus stuff is absolutely going to be under legal review. Birthright citizenship, I believe, 25 states have already filed suit against that, which means it'll be blocked by a court tomorrow, almost certainly, and by that time it'll take a year and a half to go to the Supreme Court. So none of this is to be taken as this is 100% what's happening. It is a preview of what they want to do and are trying to do, but what will inevitably face a lot of legal scrutiny from the courts and what they are allowed to do and whatnot. So I do want people to keep that in mind as well.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.